Welcome to the Crown City podcast. I'm James De Pietro, your guide through the stories, the people, and the vibrant culture that make Pasadena, California a special place to live, visit, and do business. With each episode, we bring you engaging conversations with neighbors shaping our community. We are proud to call Pasadena home and to celebrate everything that makes the Crown City shine. On this episode, I'm proud to welcome Melissa Lee, the principal in charge of urban planning and community health at Public Works Partners, a certified planning and consulting firm headquartered in New York, but with a West Coast office here in Pasadena. So Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, James.
Well, I was excited that this kind of came together. I reached out to you, I think, a couple months ago. And so there's so much to talk about in urban planning and just in real estate in general. And I'm really very excited because your family has deep roots in Pasadena. So I thought we would start our conversation there. If you can talk about your background in Pasadena and we'll open the conversation up from there.
Thank you so much for that question. I actually love talking about all things Pasadena and how I connect and how the fabric of the city speaks to me. Essentially, I'm fifth generation Pasadenian. My family came here in 1892, which makes us about the fourth Black family to come to Pasadena. So our footprint is all over the city. We were one of the founding families that helped start Friendship Baptist Church when it was a small house congregation, and then it moved to a historic edifice or building in Old Town Pasadena. My grandfather was among the first Black municipal workers for the city of Pasadena. He started with the Department of Transportation as a street sweeper, rather, and he ended his career as a manager and foreman for the sewer lines, and just there's so many stories that abound from that. So I understand the idea of deep roots, and it's very special to grow up in a place where you can really see the city's growth and trajectory through the eyes of your elders.
So where did you go to school here in Pasadena?
I started at Poly, and I ended at Westridge.
Okay.
So I was the first in my family not to go to Muir.
Muir is a very historic school.
Yeah.
And I have so many alums that have been on this podcast that have been in Muir.
Yeah. I'm still angry about that decision that my parents made.
You got a great education where you went, and it all worked out.
It always works out.
It always works out. Always works out. That's very true. And this is a kind of a interesting story that you shared a couple months ago at a visit to Octavia's bookshop, and where your family knew Octavia Butler.
Of course.
And so can you talk about that? Because I think that's a fascinating interaction.
Absolutely. Well, Pasadena is a small town trying to be a big city.
Yes.
And in particular, Black families were very much entwined and supportive of one another and knew one another. And so growing up, I would see Octavia, who was a little over 6 foot and always walking. She was somebody that just did not find comfortability behind a wheel. So she would walk the city of Pasadena, and I would see her up and down Lake Street. I would see her on Los Robles, and if I was with my mother or my grandmother, we would stop and say hello, and they'd say, well, say hello to Miss Octavia. And I'd say, hello, Miss Octavia, how are you today? And they'd have a conversation, and then we would go about our way. So I didn't find out till I was older just what a genius she was, and how she is one of our iconoclasts that have changed the world, and how well she represented Pasadena. And I found out later, as I became a student and a super fan of hers, that she would, in her walks in Pasadena, she would take note of the built environment, and she would take all of that in, and it became the backdrop of her science fiction. And so all things kind of centered around how she oriented herself to the city and then what she saw in return. Whether it was tree-lined streets, whether it was new developments or buildings, whether it was how the city was spatially represented, where her family lived versus other families, some of the inequities that the city holds, some of the beautiful thing, all the good, bad, and ugly, she took in on foot, and it became the backdrop of all of her writing.
And that's something that you can only really understand and appreciate on foot.
Correct.
Because if you're driving, you're going to miss all that detail.
Correct.
And the characteristics.
Absolutely. And
so
she would call it her Pasadena walks. Yeah.
We need more of those.
We do.
So based on your interests, who were some early mentors of yours that were especially important that gave you academic, family?
Well, definitely all of the women in my family. I come from a phenomenal line of women who were dedicated to the city, were contributing factors to the city, who helped organize within the city. So I have memory with my mother and grandmother going to city council meetings, establishing pantry lines and feeding folks in need. Ensuring that art was diverse in the city and there was access to art. So they were my first and foremost mentors and who I model myself after. And you could add Octavia to that as well.
So after Westridge, you went to University of Redlands.
I did.
And studied international relations.
Yes.
So what did you want to do in college then?
Oh my goodness. So that's a great question. I thought I had this idea of becoming an attaché, the idea of traveling the world and being representing this country and being an ambassador, learning different languages, but most importantly, building the human connection, right? And seeing the humanity in all people was very important to me. So my thought, studying international relations would be my ticket. Soon I shifted course.
So you went to NYU for graduate school.
I did.
And you studied economic development. So what was the appeal for that? And why the career shift?
So really it was an event. My idea was to go to NYU, get my master's and my PhD in public policy. I spent about 6 years working in the field after I graduated from college. And there was this kind of disconnect in terms of like aspirations and vision to actually, for them actually become realized.
Okay.
And it was all about policy was kind of standing in the way. How laws and rules dictated who had access, how we made decisions, how funding was prioritized. So I thought all would be right with the world if I focused on public policy. So I was very keen on being a policy wonk, an author, a professor, and I thought that is my place in this world. I really wanted to be able to have a different point of view. So I went to NY. I only applied to grad schools in New York City. And I thought, if I get in, I'm going. If I don't, I will reassess. So I applied to all the schools that I got into, which all happened to be New York City based, and I chose NYU. So here I am, fifth generation Pasadenian, never really left California. And I got my first New York City apartment in the East Village on 6th and 2nd. So 6th Street and 2nd Avenue. And I was doing something, right? That was a big deal. And then I had my first class the following Monday on September 7th.
Wow.
And then that following Tuesday was 9/11. And I heard the second plane go by, and mayhem, chaos, fear. I stood for hours watching people coming up from ground zero, walking by covered in white soot. The wall of sirens, just you could barely hear yourself, let alone stand to be in your own skin, the smell, the smoke. And I thought, what have I done? I made the biggest mistake of my life. Why did I leave Pasadena for this? And there was about 2 weeks where no trains, planes, or automobiles were in motion, and you had to stay in situ. So being on 6th and 2nd Street, I could not go south of Houston, which is like First Avenue,
Okay.
and I couldn't go north of 14th Street.
Mm.
So I was stuck in this bubble. And I, within those 2 weeks, made the decision I'm going to stay because I saw the power of community the power of resilience and determination. And I thought if I'm going to stay, I'm going to be a contributing factor. And so I shifted my studies, and I worked full time, went to school full time, and I really focused on community building, and really changed that my trajectory.
That's an amazing story. And I think we all have, of our kind of age, I mean, I'm in my mid 40s. I think we're kind of all in the same age group. And
Mm-hmm.
I was going to school in DC
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and I was working at a law firm during school that morning. And just the quiet
Mm-hmm.
of that afternoon, something I will never forget.
Mm-hmm.
And you were you were at ground zero. I mean, you saw everything. So yeah, it's amazing, and it's such an impactful story. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm sure
Thank
you
you.
probably lived through that day all the time, certainly on anniversaries.
Yes.
Um, this is really interesting. So, um, moving from public policy to economic development, I mean, kind of what did you bring from Pasadena to that kind of conversation? Because you're going from a very kind of suburban, it was probably even more suburban,
Right.
and then you go to the epicenter of the world of New York City.
Right.
What did you bring, and kind of what perspective did you bring to your classes?
Oh, it was, it was a combination of curiosity,
Mm.
and really wanting to dive deep into what made the city tick. Yes, it was the bright lights. Yes, it was at the time, it was 24 hours. Yes, it was the culture, right? If you think about Broadway and TV and film. But I was really interested in the unique stories. Depending on what block and in what borough, you would have a completely different experience in New York, which I thought was so fascinating. And I love the idea of the anonymity of it all. If you wanted to disappear and become punk one weekend, you could. If you wanted to turn around and the next weekend be cosmopolitan and be in museums, you could. If you wanted to be immersed in the hip hop culture, the next weekend you could. And so it seemed like almost every block in every borough had its own unique story, and it was centered by the people and their point of view and their culture and their languages and their food. And I thought that was so fascinating.
It is. I mean, I'm from Los Angeles, and I've only been to New York City twice. And I think the first time I went, it was at night, and went to go get some meat, and or we were coming back or something like that. And there were construction workers on a scaffolding at like 11:30 at night. I'm like, this would never happen in Los Angeles.
Never.
Never happen in Pasadena.
Never.
You would never get a permit for any of this, but it's all over the place.
That's right.
It never sleeps, and it's an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And just walking along the streets, like you said, it's the stories.
Mm-hmm.
How did everyone get there? What are they doing? Where do they want to go?
Exactly.
And that's kind of a fascinating thing about New York. So you worked for the mayor's office in New York.
I did.
And then you worked for a nonprofit, or you worked for is it Bedford?
Bedford Stuyvesant.
Yes, I know. I try to pronounce it correctly, but I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
And you were organizing, I think, 25 different organizations together.
Yes.
So kind of talk about how you kind of entered that role and kind of what you learned from that experience about talking and kind of gathering these different groups to have a kind of a shared vision of a neighborhood.
Well, that was a super important goal for me, was to work for Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, because it is the first community development corporation ever founded in this country. And its story, if you'll allow me, is so interesting, which drew me to it and was a magnet because I needed that experience. But the Restoration Corporation is a cluster of buildings. These are old manufacturing buildings on Fulton Street. This was a milk bottling plant. So this was an operation for 50 years. And it provided steady income for the community. So you had families who were drawn to Bedford Stuyvesant who could purchase homes, who could start businesses and enterprises, and community just flourished because of this local economic base. And most importantly, this was a historically Black community. So here you had Black lower to upper middle class really focused in this neighborhood. And then as industries shift and transform, the milk bottling plant closed and it became an eyesore, a stain on the neighborhood's existence. Here you had this huge edifice that was vacant and deteriorating. At the time, Robert Kennedy Jr. Was coming into politics on his own, and he was running for New York State Senate. Mm. And he was obviously focused on Manhattan, and not necessarily the outer boroughs. So again, once again, the women in the community said, we are seeing a shift. We are feeling this economic depression happening in the community. And we have concerns, right, about our livelihood, our children, our husbands. What's going to happen here? So they then, the women mostly, commenced on a letter writing campaign to ask RFK Jr., come to Bedford-Stuyvesant. If you do, we will support you. Mm. So he came after a series of months and months of writing letters to him. And they walk the neighborhood with him. So once again, here comes the walks. Yes. He really understood the fabric of Bedford-Stuyvesant, and they ended at this milk bottling plant company. And they said, see right in front of you. See what happens when disinvestment on a neighborhood scale or a citywide scale or a borough-wide scale happens. And so RFK Jr. turned to the plant and said, something must be done. We will invest federal and state dollars to revitalize this building. And from that, again, this organizing of particularly of women and the walk and ending, right, Rudd's Restoration Corporation was founded. And so they started, I believe, in 1966. Don't quote me, but around there. And they have been going ever since. So it was a goal of mine to be able to work on behalf of them and for them and with them. So that being said, I was brought on kind of as a special managing director to help organize the 25 nonprofit organizations who were leading economic development, workforce development, physical development in the neighborhood, organize them under a unified agenda so that when money was funneled to the neighborhood, there could be a coordinated dissemination and leveraging of funds.
That's interesting. So after New York, you moved to New Orleans.
I did.
So you went from New York to New Orleans, which is totally different culture.
It is. But so important.
It is so important. And then you got involved with redevelopment and revitalization following. I mean, it was a couple years before this, but Katrina and Rita. So you kind of stayed in the same focus.
I did.
So kind of talk about what you were doing in New Orleans.
Yes.
And kind of what New York brought. What kind of perspective did New York kind of help you bring to New Orleans?
Oh, that was a lesson for me. And I'll get into that.
Okay, but sounds exciting.
It is. It was. Yes. So I never thought I would leave New York City. It was something I had to resolve. I was like, New York has given me so much. I've invested so much. I have community here. I have so much love for, and I'm, getting that love reciprocated. So I had a really good friend who we were in the economic development world together. His name is Jeff Hebert. He, right after Katrina, 6 months after Hurricane Katrina hit, he says, I have to go home. And we all said to him, of course, we will miss you, but of course. And 5 years later, he had kind of risen in rank because he is absolutely brilliant and committed to be positioned as the executive director and head of the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority. So I called him to obviously praise such a huge accomplishment and congratulate him. And he says, and he's very humble. He had said, "Oh, Melissa, I'm so glad you called. Thanks, that's nice. However, I'm really glad you called because I have this idea." how about you come to New Orleans? You come work for me. And I have a portfolio of disaster community development block grant monies. And we need to figure out how to program them on a neighborhood scale. So within 45 minutes, I had a job and I made the transition. So sometimes with life, you just have to say yes if you can. So I always wanted to be a part of the recovery of New Orleans, but never really found a way. Again, not to be a voyeur or a culture vulture or to take from just to build my resume. I really wanted to be a contributing factor, and I felt like this was it. And so when I got to New Orleans, it was a shock culturally, spatially, um, but it was exactly what I needed in very profound ways.
Hmm. I remember driving through Louisiana, not a couple months later after the hurricanes. And I mean, the devastation was incredible, and to be able to play a positive part
Yeah.
in that reconstruction must have been really fulfilling.
It was challenging because your heart was ripped open almost every other day.
Right.
Um, uh, I call New Orleans a she. That's how I refer to New Orleans in my mind. New Orleans is a she, and she is the ultimate seductress, right?
Hmm.
She lures you in, she loves on you, she fills your cup, and then she kind of spits you out when she's done, but then she brings you back because she's not done. That is certainly New Orleans, and that was challenging because here you are, you are up front and center with a built environment that has gone through so much, and its people have gone through so much. So right next door to destruction are these beautiful, historic 200-year-old homes with like wrought iron fences and beautiful balconies. And like, how do you, in your mind, it's really hard to negotiate that kind of juxtaposition. And the weather is oppressive, but yet you're never really that cold, right?
That's very
Things
true.
move very slow. And coming from New York, where time is money and money is time, you do not waste a second. In New Orleans, you take a breath. You take a breath because there's always time. And so I was really struggling with this issue. And a friend of mine, a new friend, said, "Well, it sounds like you're in the middle of a paradox." I said, "I am." I said, "On one end, I want to get stuff done, but on the other, I'm being told to wait." On one end, it is heart-wrenching to see such destruction, but on the other, there's so much beauty. And he says, "Well, so we are all on this pathway, and that is to understand the universe. And the first step in that is to understand paradox. We might not get there, but it's the journey and exploration. And that is what you are doing right now. You are on this journey of just exploring what paradox means." So I needed that. And I've carried that with me ever since.
I mean, how did you shift from New York to New Orleans? I mean, because going from, like you said, nonstop, has to be done now, to take a breath,
Mhm.
take a step back. I mean,
It was humbling.
yeah, I can imagine.
It took at least 6 months to remember where I was and to take a breath before I did anything.
Hmm.
So that kind of humility is really important to have. And I think I had to go through that in order to embody what it meant to be humble in that way. Yeah.
Having seen New York recover, having seen New Orleans recover, how did urban planning change over the course of just 10 years?
Yes.
I mean, is lightning speed for a lot of these things. I mean, what did you witness in terms of how we approach the rebuilding of neighborhoods?
Yes. So I think first and foremost, what I'm really proud of as a professional is that there is, for the most part, there is a huge crop of us that are willing to understand the history of the urban planning profession.
Hmm.
Its history is not necessarily as illustrative and glorious as one would think. And it's something I inherently know as a person who is a descendant of enslaved Africans. That as a profession, somebody had to plan out and design the inequities that we experience in this city. Somebody had to plan the separate but equal classrooms for children. Somebody had to plan out the whites only and blacks only water fountains. And that is the history of this profession. And so what we are doing is acknowledging that and trying to unlearn from that. And to me, over the last 10 years, that has been a really profound experience, because as we are approaching projects, we are seeing where, for example, resilience issues, if trees necessarily aren't planted in certain neighborhoods, what is the byproduct of that? You have homes that have high utilities because they're trying to keep cool in the summer. It becomes unaffordable. You are near areas where there's high traffic, so you have asthma, those types of things. So we are now working to undo these practices of harm, and we are trying to explore the alternatives for whole communities. And so that has been like the biggest shift, and that's what keeps me in the profession, is that exploration.
That's fascinating. I remember reading an article years ago about Los Angeles and how the number of trees showed the wealth of a neighborhood. And so I think they used Vermont Avenue as an example of up near Griffith Park, you had neighborhoods that were full of trees, and as you went south, there were less and less trees, and obviously the health declined.
Yes.
Because there were lack of trees, lack of shade, and just the use of trees was indicative of the inequality that was implemented during that time. And I never, there's one of the things where, it makes sense after someone explains it to you, but I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to understand the impact of that.
Yes.
Just be like, oh, it's just trees, right? But there's a lot more going on.
And somebody had to plan that.
And someone had to plan that. Exactly.
So how do we do better?
How do we do better? Yeah. Or undo? If that's possible. Because in instances that I'm sure you can't undo a lot of things.
Especially if it's generational.
Right.
Yes.
So we're seeing a huge shift in the last 50 years, it seems like, in your profession.
That's right.
And that's before we even talk about technology. So how has technology impacted all of this?
Yes, I think technology has been quite fascinating. At the epicenter of my work is really centered in community and building community vision. So it is asking the questions, well, what does a just community or a healthy community or a well planned out community look like? And then bringing those tools that we use around decision making and democratizing them. And so technology really helps with that. So whether it be as small as having a virtual meeting, typically, again, traditionally, community meetings are held at like 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. That is difficult for the majority of residents, particularly those who have jobs, where there's an hour and a half commute, have children, who are caregiving their elderly parents. That is a tough proposition. So somebody may be well-meaning, may really care about an issue, may have a lot of insight, but they cannot make that 6 p.m. meeting on a Tuesday. So really, again, it's thinking about democratizing, using the notion of online tools like a Zoom has been revolutionary. Being able to provide surveys that allow people to ruminate on a question and then answer is huge. The notion of using AI to take community data and input, and the instant output would be, here's a restored public plaza. And this plaza is not just a concrete slab. It is now one surrounded by trees with maybe pop-up entrepreneur carts with a water feature and children at play. And we're able to kind of take all of this rich community data and illustrate it in real time.
The nice thing that I've seen more and more used is visualization tools.
Yes.
And that's really important. I'm coming from a real estate background where a tenant walks into a space and they can't see what you can see.
That's right.
And so you kind of have to educate them and be like, the wall could go there, your desk could go there, and this is, kind of play around with space planning. But most people they're working on their business.
Right.
They're doing their own thing. They can't necessarily see what a planner might be able to see
That's right.
based on your experience.
It's a practice skill set.
It is.
Yes. And again, how do you democratize kind of that ability?
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the availability or accessibility of community events. We've seen here in Pasadena, I've seen it shift from like one time event to that's like at 5 p.m. to maybe this is a series of conversations.
That's right.
Which is great because, like you said, maybe someone's working that day, they can't attend. Maybe there's another alternative date that they can come and
That's
get
right.
their feedback. And unfortunately, it seems like we're talking about the missing middle in housing, but there's the missing middle in civic participation as well.
Absolutely.
You have a very engaged kind of youth kind of movement that are kind of interested in issues, but then you have also an engaged and very active elderly population that are around issues. And so you get those voices, but you kind of miss the 30 to 60-year-old voices.
That's right.
Because they're taking care of kids or taking care of their parents or working in jobs.
That's right.
So how do you bring those voices into the fold?
Yeah, I mean, it's an iterative process, and I love the idea of iteration and being completely transparent in that process. So a lot of times we work with key community members because we are only the vehicle, but we are not necessarily experts. I believe the community is the expert, and I myself, yes, I might be smart, but I'm much smarter when I am ideating in community.
Yeah.
And a room with a room full of people. That's where the best ideas and those breakout innovations come forward. I don't think that as me, myself, and I could get there. It really has to be done collectively. And so the idea of providing a process where you ideate or you ruminate on a theme over maybe 4 different meeting interventions, where you come up with a problem, you solicit feedback, you do some generating of ideas and prioritization, you present that again, you ask the next series of questions, so it builds on one another. That has been a really key aspect, and also fun. I believe in fun and imagination and play aspect of this process, in my opinion.
I think fun is underrated because who wants to go to a stale planning meeting? We have enough stale meetings that we have to attend.
Absolutely.
And this, I think it's a fascinating topic, and it's something that it can be really engaging with the community. So how do we make that kind of a little more accessible through not entertainment, but just how you approach it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so fascinating to watch adults gravitate towards post-it notes or markers
Right.
or marbles, and just to have a minute just to kind of in a small minute to kind of play around and ideate and use your imagination is quite refreshing and effective.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I attended one of the series on the Union Street cycle track, and they laid out every single block and had people kind of say what they wanted on every single block.
That's the best.
And it was a fun experience because everyone's kind of chatting. You get to see some neighbors, get to meet some people.
Exactly.
And it's a great way to bring people together. So you're the principal at Public Works Partners.
Yes.
And you're leading their Pasadena office.
Yes.
It's very exciting. And interestingly, Public Works uses the phrase community health as it refers to planning. And so I wanted to see, kind of get your take on why using the community health name versus urban planning, and what was the thought behind that?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. It really is centered around our ethos and our values. So Public Works Partners was started about 13, 14 years ago by our CEO, and she was also is the co-founder. And we all of us in the leadership position, we knew each other during our time in city government. So we were kind of raised in that discipline and that practice. So we take these tools of like management and urban planning But we find that our biggest value is in community. And so we are really centered in bringing equitable spaces to life, and using kind of that skill set and that discipline, but in a way that is grounded in co-design and community vision. So for us, we are not the behemoths, those international firms, that we need, but certainly that is not who we are trying to be, that are very perfunctory in their work. They might assess the city, and then provide recommendations. Fabulous. Wealth of knowledge. But for us, we really enjoy being in community. And so the idea of what are the drivers that makes a community healthy and a community equitable and a community whole is really important. So for us, it provides a way for us to stand out a bit and to also kind of denote the types of projects that we are best at and that we're willing to do as well.
I love the health aspect of it. And I mean, you'd be confusing if we called everything Department of Health, but because we have multiple things. But I love the idea of planning being a health-driven profession, as opposed to just kind of a nuts and bolts, what goes best on this block kind of profession. Because I think it opens up a lot more interesting conversations and questions. Going back to like the example of the planning on Vermont Avenue not having trees, obviously the health benefits for just having trees is significant.
Absolutely.
And that's a minor thing. But looking at it as a holistically, as a health benefit in the planning process, I think is really interesting. What do you think are some of the challenges that we're facing in kind of urban planning today? It's a very broad, very vague question, but I think it's an important one.
It is. So innovation is key. I think innovating our practices where communities are planned out at this point. Communities understand and have been through planning practices, planning exercises. So it's really about being able to distill what are the key levers that would help transform a community, and asking very, I think, salient questions, which to me is respectful. In that. So how do you overcome planning fatigue is huge. And so we have to kind of innovate our processes, and we have to up our skill sets in terms of how we relate to the general public, or how we relate to community members. So I think that's a huge challenge that we're facing. And then as well as we are driving recommendations, how do we ensure that these recommendations don't sit on a shelf, and that they're action oriented? And that really means that they're able to be funded, and that they are in line with what's possible. Powers that be, with the processes. So really doing our homework and being diligent, again, about innovating how we are using our practice in a way that just doesn't check the box and doesn't sit on the shelf. I think that is huge. But funding this type of work is certainly challenging.
I think we've all sat in meetings where there's some grand visions and there's some great strategies, but like you said, it's checking the box. You're putting these ideas on a shelf, and in 5 years, another group is going to come in and do the same thing.
That's right.
And it's just it's an endless cycle.
That's right.
It's like, how do you avoid that? And so I think being practical is really important. And unfortunately, a lot comes down to funding.
Yes.
In your profession.
Yes, it does. It does. So it's again, what is the value proposition? What is the ROI? I talk a lot about what is the rate of return to doing the right type of planning and engagement. And so it's really distilling that. And so if you do not have community buy-in, think of all of the delays that would happen on a project that affects the powers that be, that affects departments, that affects how prioritization happens. So how do you bring a community along with an opportunity, for example? Think about other aspects of a rate of return or your ROI. Are there ways that you can certainly think about bringing costs down on the process? Can you truncate a process so that there is the right work done at the right tempo and with the right tolerance?
Right. One thing I thought was really interesting about your background is, and I didn't know this, was that you're a yoga instructor. I don't know if do you still teach?
I do not.
Okay.
No,
But you did for a while.
I did.
And so how does that kind of tie into your sense of kind of balance with everything? Because I think it's an interesting parallel.
It's everything. So going back to New York City, it was intense. I would get up at 7 in the morning. I'm sorry, I was on the subway at 7 in the morning. Headed into my office about 7:45, and then I would probably leave the office between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. And that was 5 days a week because there was so much to be done. There was so much work. That is not sustainable.
No.
But I was committed and I loved the work and I did it because I was young. I had the energy.
Yes, right. It's a little different now.
Right. Until I didn't. And I will say the byproduct of that was I was completely disconnected from my body, and my poor little body was just ragged and run down. So I needed to find tools and methods for me to reconnect and to prioritize my health again, quite frankly, and to de-stress. And so the idea of yoga was interesting to me because it was that little bit of kind of selfish, sacred time just to do that. And so the biggest takeaway for me is the connection to breath. I think if one notices how long and how many times they hold their breath throughout the day, and it might be in reaction to what somebody said, and to remain professional, you have to keep a cool exterior. Sometimes one holds their breath while doing that. Or there might be some conflicting issue that's happening in the political arena. You know, the election, for example, one might hold their breath while they are receiving news. And that is huge. So the reminder and the connection just to breathe. And to me, that is one of the hardest and most transformational yoga practices that there is.
That's interesting. So you had these experiences in New York and then New Orleans, and you came back to Pasadena.
I had to.
You had to. And so earlier this year, you had a discussion with Pasadena NAACP President Ellen Ensign about the impact of the Black community here in Pasadena and what's happened in the last 50 years. Because we've seen a large decline. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing, both historically, but also as your glasses of being a planner as well? Kind of what have been the impacts on Pasadena?
Yeah, you know, Alan and myself were both native Pasadenians, and we've had the pleasure and the experience of being born and raised here. And so one of the things that we are noticing is that the Black Pasadena that we knew and nurtured us is no more. And that is because of opportunities and decision-making around what it means to be a whole community. The ways in which we have been excluded have impacted the ability for multi-generations to live here. So the population declined for opportunity, which I can't blame them. So school systems, right? The public school system, there was an active disinvestment. So by the time I came around, the public schools were in a bit of a challenge, hence why I did not go to Muir. The redlining that happened in this city, right? One could not leverage their real estate in the same way because Blacks were subjugated to Northwest Pasadena, and the racial covenants are codified and written into law and into policy. So that changed the opportunity to build generational wealth. So when Pasadena's real estate was on the rise, individuals were like, well, I am now in a city where I have to commute 2 hours to work. I have a house that maybe I inherited or I purchased that is a 150-year-old home. There's a lot of maintenance that is required.
Right.
I can't necessarily leverage what I need from the bank because my property is not necessarily valued as it should be. Here's an opportunity, though, to take care of the increase in real estate market to start over, where I can get in a community where I can be in a new build. So my maintenance is almost nil. I can get into the public school system where my children are getting quality education. And I'm only driving 15 minutes to work. So that is a huge transformational opportunity for an individual, and no one could knock it.
No.
Right. However, it significantly affected the Black population because it was the majority Black individuals, families, homeowners that had to make that choice. So I talk to my friends all the time, and they say, we miss Pasadena, but we don't miss the struggle. And that makes me sad.
It does. And that's not even taking into account the freeway.
Right.
Which was just a huge issue. That's a whole other conversation.
That's right.
Is there any way to, as an urban planner and someone that understands history, are there ways to reverse some of these trends? Is that even possible at this point? Or are we just kind of left with declining populations?
I think that there are restorative aspects to this work. When looking at opportunities around economic opportunities. So I love our neighborhood commercial corridors. I think they tell us everything about our city. They really are the keepers of our cultural fabric, our historic fabric, and our commercial corridors are kind of the intersection of culture, commerce, and history. And so if there are policies, whether it's zoning or planning, that allow for individuals to take root as new entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who are expanding to a second location, and how we prioritize that. I think of Perry Sandwich Shop.
I was going to say that.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And we can do more of that.
You were part of an effort to a discussion about diversity in your profession.
Yeah.
How has diversity impacted planning, and what are you seeing on the kind of the ground level in terms of students coming into the profession that have mixed backgrounds, both economic, racial, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, I think that individuals are really interested in becoming planning professionals. So it's really about speaking about the process steps. I think my pathway wasn't clear. I kind of went about it the roundabout way, and it was because of circumstance and big life events that kind of drove me there. Because again, I was going to be an attaché and run a U.S. embassy, so I thought. And so it's really speaking about what is the profession of planning, and it is no longer your mother or father's profession, and so it's super exciting. I think it's about really centering community. So a lot of planning initiatives have to be grounded by community consensus, and community negotiations. And so there's been a lot of understanding of how to innovate around that. I think it's also, again, it's a blend of skill sets. I talk to individuals a lot. You need to understand and love math and engineering. You may not be an expert, but you need to understand that. You need to be a lover of history. You need to be able to read, right? Because again, if you don't understand where we've come from, how do you move forward? You need to be a lover of maps. I mean, I can look at maps all day and be happy. And so what does the story of maps tell us? Like, how do you become an expert storyteller through these tools? You need to really understand the idea of imagination. And I believe anything is possible, right, when you pair radical imagination with action. So I try to talk about how exciting it is. And I think that it's almost demystifying what we thought planners were to actually how planners operate now.
I think if anyone goes to a city meeting or a planning meeting, You get lots of different opinions.
Yes.
Very heated conversations.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have to kind of find some middle ground or bring people together?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple tools that I like to use that kind of go against the grain. I think a community a planning meeting should be one of the last things that one does.
Interesting.
I don't think you should begin or end with that. I think it should be the last thing you do. I think you owe it to the work that you're doing to take a walk, to do your homework, to understand and know from your perspective what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. So, doing your own kind of SWOT analysis. I think it's also recognizing that you are not the expert. You might be the facilitator. You might be able to hold the container. So, really diverting resources and funds to support those community experts. I find that once I leave a community, my job is not done until those tools and knowledge are in the hands of the community to then continue moving it forward. Because I'm not a community member. I'm just a planner here trying to provide some solutions. We're going to create solutions together, but once I leave, who's going to be the bearer of that? Who's going to own that? Not I. So I think it's really important. So it's really pushing, identifying who are those cultural bearers, who are those community experts who could speak to that. And I push people to really go beyond just the usual suspects. I think anyone and everyone can be an expert. And I really talk about, from my perspective, I have kind of my top five list. I have a top five of my favorite community experts or my favorite urbanists that I talk about a lot, which most people wouldn't even think about. And I can share them with you if you want.
I love that.
Oh,
if you
okay.
could quickly.
Okay. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Nice.
The message, right? If you really want to understand the impact of inequitable urban planning, listen to the message. It is an urban treatise. It's a masterpiece. It takes you to the Bronx, New York, late 70s, early 80s, what it was like to live in a city that to live in a neighborhood that the city completely divested in. I would say Jean-Michel Basquiat. I adore that man. And he was one of the first graffiti artists in Soho in Lower Manhattan, really to take shape. And he would tag these political, satirical notes all throughout the city. And again, he would walk and he would realize there was so much dichotomy here. There was wealth versus poverty. There was, education versus none, that sort of thing. And he really centered you kind of on his critique of what it meant to be in all of that. Gordon Parks. I adore Gordon Parks. Most people know him as the producer writer of Shaft, but before that, his photography was key. He would go into cities, particularly urban cities, where he would take pictures of Black life. So there you go with I can't, you and I can't imagine the white fountain and the black fountain, but through his photos, we can. Right. I adore Anthony Bourdain. I miss him so much every day. And he, in my opinion, understood humanity. So no place was too remote. No people were too desperate. No food was too exotic. Everybody had their sense of place, and everything and everyone had humanity. And I think if we all had his capacity of honoring humanity, we'd be in a much different place. This world would be a much different place. And lastly, because I am from Pasadena, Kendrick Lamar. He's brilliant. Nobel Prize winner, rapper, writer, artist, who just is like, I think, the present day of all of the people that I spoke about. So all to say that our community experts, those who understand the city, those who are planners, those who are urbanists, are everyone and anyone. You just have to open your eyes.
That's a wonderful message, and I love that list. As we kind of wind down our conversation, there's so many different things that we could have talked about. but we're running out of time. But I want to make sure we ask this question. This is my final question of every conversation, which is, as someone from here, if you could design a perfect day in or around Pasadena, from breakfast to late night, what would you do? Where would you go? And what would you eat and drink?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. Do I have to choose?
You don't have to. It could be as specific or vague as you want it.
Okay. I would have to start out hiking. That was something that I always did growing up and actually saved me during COVID. The notion of kind of that escapism, and my childhood friends and I would wear a mask while we hiked either in Eaton Canyon or above JPL, just to be in community. So I would have to get up early, take a beautiful hike, take in a little bit of nature, and then come down for some breakfast tacos. Because of course you're gonna be hungry.
Yes. Where would you go?
That is a great question.
Breakfast tacos or breakfast burritos.
Oh my gosh. I mean, of course, Lucky's.
Yeah.
But there's some other places that popped up, but that's the go-to. Lots of extra bacon. Because again, you just hiked like 4 miles.
You gotta replenish yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then from there, obviously, recoup a little bit, get nice, clean, fresh after being in the mud, and then I think from there I would adore just kind of window shopping. Octavia's books I love. April Bloom's is a Black-owned retail shop. I would love to just kind of window shop and then sit and eat. I love a good Diane salad at Green Street.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, oh my goodness, this is just like a complete luxurious day for me.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that, I would have to maybe go to Burke Williams, little spa treatment.
You deserve it after your hike.
Absolutely.
I understand.
Absolutely. And then I think, from there, oh gosh, I would love some outdoor dining, maybe at Magnolia House or something like that. So just easy breezy, but definitely starting the day off with a hike, breakfast tacos, breakfast burritos, a little bit of connecting with friends and family, with our local retail. Yeah.
It all comes down to walking.
Absolutely.
And everything. It's the best way to absorb a community, neighborhood. Well, Melissa, thank you for being such a great part of Pasadena.
Oh my gosh, thanks for asking.
For building stronger communities with your work, and for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
It is such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for asking.
So, continuing our collaboration, the featured song is All Right Here by Pasadena's own The Next Doors. Please follow them on social media and at nextdoorsmusic.com. I want to thank everyone here at Pasadena Media, George, Chris, Bobby, Liza, and especially Jeff, Terry, Bob, and Jasiri for their special guidance and assistance. For more information about Pasadena Media and for their incredible work that they're doing, please visit pasadenamedia.org. For more information and to support this podcast, please visit thecrowncitypodcast.com, and you can find the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. Until next time, please remember to stay well, embrace your diversity and complexities of our cities, and as always, I will see you around.